Welcome to today's episode of Work Beautiful, a series of explorations on productivity, design, psychology, and the future of work. Brought to you by Beautiful.AI. I'm Lou Giacalone, your host for today, joined by Bay Area journalist Katie Morell. Together, we'll explore her research on the subject of rituals in the workplace and the science behind how rituals can make teams stronger and more productive.
The piece that we worked on collaboratively, that rituals are another experiential aspect that helps form people's experience set and how they feel about things.
I personally was very surprised by when I was doing the research around it because I thought, rituals seem like such a personal thing. I mean, everyone talks about religious rituals and there's a lot of people have personal rituals that are non-religious, but how does that translate to work? And actually it translates very profoundly to work. And what I found was that companies that have really ingrained rituals in, team focused rituals or even corporate overarching rituals are more strong and have higher retention than other companies that do not. And so it's really interesting. It's like, there are so many examples of this, and it's just, it creates cohesion. It creates, team, it's like you care about the people that you're working with, you care about the product more, and you're actually in a lot of ways more productive. That's one thing that I was also surprised by, because when rituals are used in the workplace, that can be the product of that.
That's interesting. It makes sense, right? Because rituals, like you said, have always been associated with kind of group and collective activities. And of course, your workplace is a group and collective activity.
Exactly.
But what defines a ritual? Like, what makes it specifically a ritual?
Right. It's actually something that a lot of researchers really shy away from defining because it seems so nebulous. It's like there are so many different definitions and different types. But there is one person that I spoke with that has decided to really make it his work to wrangle that definition. His name is Dr. Nick Hobson, and he's from the University of Toronto. He's one of the workers at Psychology Compass, which is kind of a cognitive research firm for companies in terms of organizational development. And last year, he spoke with a bunch of different researchers, and he put out a paper that defines rituals in 3 different ways. And so a ritual has to have these 3 components as part of it, or it's not a ritual. So the first one is it has to have a ritual script, they say. So it has to be very defined, like you cannot deviate. So not necessarily what you say, but just how you act. One example of a ritual in the workplace would be, let's say that you and 2 of your coworkers every single Monday morning go and get coffee at Starbucks, but you only go at 10:30 in the morning, and you never go before that or after that. You never go to a different coffee shop. You never bring other people than those other 2 people, and it's so defined. And so that's kind of this script that you're following. Mm-hmm. The second thing is that there is irrationality. This seemingly is the most prevalent thing with rituals. It's like, who cares that you go to, Starbucks with these 2 people at 10:30 in the morning on a Monday? But actually it matters. To those people, it matters. And so irrationality is another thing. And then it has to have meaning beyond the action. So okay, whatever, you're going to get coffee, but what is the meaning beyond it? And sometimes people can't really define that in words, but you can define it in a feeling. So in that instance, maybe you're feeling like, okay, well, this is the time where I bond with my 2 besties at work. Right. And so those were his 3 things. But in the broader research that I did, I found that there were 2 other things. One of them that is really across the board is that rituals have to be physical. You can't just think that I'm experiencing a ritual in my mind. It actually has to be something that you do physically, with your body. Right.
No VR rituals.
No VR rituals. Exactly. It doesn't really work. Would be very cool if it did, but it doesn't work with the brain. And so the other thing is it's group buy-in. Those other 2 people that you go to Starbucks with, they have to feel like it's just as important to them. And you can see how that kind of integrates with religion, because when you go to a church service, or when you go to temple, or when you go someplace where it has a religious connotation, you can tell that it is that important to everyone in that room, without equivocation.
I realized 2 hours later.
I guess in the workplace, it starts to make sense when you think about it, because you wouldn't think of something as a ritual when the boss says you should do this all the time, right? Because then it's like a mandate or an order.
Yes.
But I'm a little curious, tell me a little bit more about the irrationality. Why is the irrationality Is it just because it's your brain's like thinking in a different way, rational versus irrational? Or?
Yeah, so actually that gets into the brain science. So the brain science behind this is what really, really fascinated me. Nick Hobson from the University of Toronto, he explained how there are two methods of cognition in the brain. So there's instrumental cognition or instrumental thinking and ritualistic thinking. So instrumental thinking is kind of like, it's basically just kind of goal normal thinking, normal in quotes. So for example, if you had a goal that you needed to get to work, you need to finish this assignment by 5 o'clock, and that's that. Like that's how you think of it. So it makes sense. It's very easy to kind of connect the dots.
Yep.
Ritualistic thinking is, it doesn't really make sense. And so like not necessarily, it's kind of, you do something and you do it because in your body you know that there is something really important about this, but you can't really explain in words why it's important. And so there are so many instances of this. And one thing that I found really interesting is Dr. Christine Ligari. She's a psychology professor at the University of Texas at Austin. She was talking about how a lot of ritualistic thinking is, I don't want to say bred out of us, but it's very, kids, they are very easy on ritualistic thinking. They believe in magic. Like there are things, they don't need to understand why, Santa Claus exists. Like
right.
He just exists.
Well, they must put the cookies out.
Exactly.
They must go to sleep.
Right,
they must close their eyes. If otherwise, right, otherwise he doesn't show up. Right?
Exactly. But they don't need to know how or like what the wind patterns are going to be to like get him to your house. Like so that's instrumental versus ritualistic thinking. That's just an example. There are so many examples in the workplace of business leaders often don't really think about rituals in the workplace because they think like, what's the point? Really, I need to talk about my Q4 financials, not do a ritual. So when you say what you said earlier was really on point, because when a business leader or a CEO or someone very high up says, okay, you need to do this ritual, it does not have the same effect.
So this is a ground up culture thing.
Yes.
Like you want to encourage this, right? This is your team keeping itself together.
Exactly. So it's really team focused.
Yeah.
So there are examples in broad, large corporations of rituals that are effective, but the ones that are most effective are the ones that are organic, like you say, that have come up in teams, and it could be different departments have different rituals themselves.
Yeah.
So like one example of a successful ritual in the workplace that is top down is at Method. Method Products is the soap company in San Francisco, of course. And my husband worked there for years, and it's really interesting because what they do is they have something called rookie cookies. So the first week that you start, you have to make your very favorite type of cookie, and you have to make a lot, actually. I think it was like 50 of them or something. And so
bring enough for everybody.
Exactly. So he is from Chicago, which is the birthplace of Potbelly's, which is a sandwich shop in Chicago, which is like just to die for.
Been there.
Yeah. So they have this really awesome chocolate chip oatmeal cookie. And my husband is obsessed with it and talks about it constantly and how sad he is that there's no Potbelly's in San Francisco, and it's a whole thing. But anyway, he decided that he would bring that cookie to Method. And so what they do as part of this ritual is you bring it, you put it on your desk, and you have a whole tray of them, and then you send out an email to the entire company. And the idea is that people from all over the company then have to come to you to have a cookie, and then you interact with them. Right. So it's kind of this onboarding, like very soft, kind of like a get to know you icebreaker.
So that underlying meaning there is it's a way to be an icebreaker.
Exactly. So that it's because it's really aligning with company values. Like the most powerful rituals that there are in companies are aligned with one of or many of the values in the company. So at Method, it's very much about transparency, it's about teamwork, collaboration, and that kind of speaks to that on many levels. So that's just one example.
And I'm sure these things just crop up in all sorts of weird ways.
Yeah, really weird. Like there was one actually, so part of the piece, I spoke with this woman named Dina Shavitz, who is a project manager in San Francisco at a consulting firm called Prolific Interactive, and she loves her job. But she was telling me about one of the projects that she was doing. And so she and her team, as part of the project, had to go a round trip. Actually, it was more than 30 miles. It was like 85 miles round trip every single Friday. And so they would take an Uber out there. And in
Bay Area traffic.
That's
not fun.
Oh, it's hours. It's just, and it's Friday night, 6 p.m., like it's kind of, that's just what it is.
Yeah.
So a couple weeks into this every Friday, rotation, she realized that, she wanted to start kind of making it fun. So this was very organic. It was just her and a few of her colleagues. And what she did was she thought, okay, I'm going to start thinking of this, trip home, because it's like a solid 2-hour trip home probably, as a road trip. And so whenever she's on a road trip, she always goes to get fast food. And so she's like, hey guys, we're going to pull into McDonald's. And her team was like, really? And she's like, yeah, let's just do it, whatever. And so they pulled into McDonald's and they ended up getting all these Happy Meals and they just had a really fun time. They just kind of it was just something silly and they could have gone to a fancy restaurant, but they decided to go to Mickey D's instead. And so then it turned into, they didn't even think about it, but then the next week they decided to go to Carl's Jr. And then the next week they decided to go to another place. And by the end of this 10-month program, it had actually become kind of one of the things that held them together. And so it was really fun for them.
Something almost to, even in the face of the long drive, it gives them a little something fun to look forward to.
Exactly. And even beyond that, it was a bonding experience. So it's you would not think there's nothing wrong with McDonald's, but it's very unique. And so it's kind of something that they did at the same time. So back to Dr. Hobson's definition of rituals, it was physical, totally irrational. You don't have to go to McDonald's. You could do something else. It was something that had meaning because it was bonding them. Yeah. And so it's really, there's a lot of things around that really make it powerful.
Let's talk a little bit more about the neuroscience aspect of that. I thought that was really fascinating. We see this stuff in our lives in all different ways. I mean, what else did you find?
Yeah, so the brain science behind rituals is probably the most compelling part that I realized within the research of this piece. But actually the piece itself was kind of spurred on by a personal experience that does touch on the brain science as well. Mm-hmm. And so the personal experience is very personal to me. So my grandmother, who I was extremely close to, almost like a parent relationship in some ways, she passed away at the age of 98 in August of 2017. And so the way my family works is we're not religious at all. I never grew up religious, and we always celebrate it in northern Michigan, where we have a summer home in the summer of every year after the death. Mm-hmm. And so it just so happened that she died a year, almost to the day that we would have had the next reunion. And so I had never had someone that close to me pass away. Understandably, I was in deep grief and it was very hard for my entire family. But what was interesting was it was not until I went to the ritual of having the memorial service, and the year that happened in between was extremely hard on me. And so emotionally, there was a lot of strife for me in many aspects of my life. And so, which really didn't have to do with my grandmother. And I think, yes, grief, but it seemed like there was something else. And so I couldn't really put my finger on it. And so I just thought it was grief. Well, I went to the memorial service and it was beautiful, and it was, my entire family was there, and we had a lot of obviously ritualistic things that we did in the memorial service. And I walked out of the memorial service and I felt like, I don't want to say a different person, but I felt completely different in that moment. And so I felt lighter, I felt happier, and it wasn't closure. I mean, it was closure, I think, but it was beyond that. And so there has been a palpable, very profound energetic shift inside of me since that memorial service. So now we're sitting here in late 2018, almost 2019. It's permanent. Something happened. And so I came home and it was so profound that I was like, wait a minute, this is not just closure. Something happened in the ritual aspect. There has to be some sort of brain science behind this because my brain feels different. There's something different. And so yes, of course, I'm still sad that she's gone, and that will be for the rest of my life. But that's not, it's not the same type of feeling that I had before. So I started looking into it. And so that kind of spurred me onto this project. And while I was looking into it, I found that when people engage in ritual, there is a lowering of the anxiety response, right. A dramatic lowering. And so part of the reason for that is because of the structure and the order of the ritual. So it's kind of, it makes it so that you actually are able to relax a little bit more and accept whatever is happening in that moment. And so I know we had spoken earlier about the instrumental cognition versus ritualistic cognition. Right. So that kind of plays into it. So that's one of the reasons why people have such a hard time nailing this down. It's just, it's instinctual. Like it's like your body telling you, not your mind. Like there's something just different about it. I mean, it's something that is really obvious in a lot of ways in sports, because that's something that, like you think about like the All Blacks, the rugby team from New Zealand, and how they have this really incredible, like
The haka.
the
Yeah.
haka,
Oh,
yeah, like exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, and I bet you I've never spoken with anyone as part of the All Blacks, but I bet you that if I did, they would say like, "There's no way that we would ever not do that. Are you kidding me?" Like that's
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
Right, exactly.
it's sacred. But that is something very interesting, because that points to all of the definitions of ritual, all of the components of ritual, which the physicality, I mean, you could say that's irrational, maybe not to them, but you can kind of be like, well, how does that help you play rugby? Like, like what is the deal with that? But you could say that with a lot of other athletes as well. Like, LeBron James, he used to go like this with chalk before every single game. Michael Jordan, like he used to wear his college gym shorts underneath his Bulls jersey for years. And it's like, how does that, I mean, and then there's that kind of crosses the line of superstition, and there's
Right.
and scientists kind of fight over that as well, but like that, it's the idea that there is something that is physical, that is somewhat irrational, it has the buy-in, especially with the All Blacks, from a group of people. I mean, the military is another example of that.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting that we just don't really think of these things in a work context most of the time.
Yes.
But they're powerful forces that are acting on us, again, whether we think about it or not, and whether we try and do it or not.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. One of the people that I spoke with that, it's somewhat applicable to work, that you can kind of connect the dots there, is his name is Dr. Michael I. Norton. He's a Harvard business professor, and he's done a ton of research on rituals. And one of his most entertaining studies is he took a group of people and he told them they had no idea what they were doing, and he put them in a room, and there was an audience in the room, and he said, okay, I need each one of you to sing Journey's Don't Stop Believing to karaoke style. You cannot practice. You go in there and you're going to be judged and graded on your performance. And so these people,
No stress.
No stress. I mean, it's like that is like the worst thing that you can tell most people, unless you're like a American Idol star or something. But like most people would be really afraid of that.
Right.
And so what he did was, for some of the people, he created a completely arbitrary ritual, which I guess you could say is an oxymoron, because a lot of rituals could be seen as arbitrary. But anyway, so sometimes he would tell people to like clap 3 times. That would be their ritual before they go on stage. Some people would kind of snap or do something else or twirl around, or, there were a million things that he asked people to do. And he found that the people who did a ritual performed markedly better than the other group that had no ritual. And so it's really interesting, because it kind of goes back to Dr. Hobson's thesis about how the anxiety response in the brain goes down when rituals happen. Then if you translate that into the workplace, there are so many instances where that could be helpful. I mean, imagine like going into a presentation and, kind of having a ritual before that. I mean, one thing that I didn't write about in the piece, which I think is fascinating, but Amy Cuddy, who is one of the TED Talk, superstars, she has this whole thing about power posing. And I've never heard her speak about it being a ritual, but this is just me extrapolating and projecting what I think she's talking about. And really, it's kind of this concept where you like stand in front of a mirror and you like make yourself big and powerful, and you like put your hands on your hips, and you just feel like, even if you're absolutely scared like out of your mind, and then you go in and you do better. And so like that could be perceived as a type of ritual.
Well, I mean, it's funny you mention that, because there is, as if you read about presenting and public speaking and everything, you do hear people talk about the benefit of calming yourself, prior to going on stage.
Yes.
And that people have rituals, I guess, some of them maybe not as irrational as other, but, like spending 10 minutes deep breathing, or
Totally.
getting it because of that relaxation aspect.
Absolutely.
So again, the whole rituals turn into relaxation. I think that's like the causal chain there.
Yes.
That makes it really interesting.
Yeah.
It's very fascinating.
And then translating it to work is something that it seems like it's actually gaining a ton of traction right now. So when we talk about rituals, it's very obvious to talk about them in the personal context. So from, sports figures to religious experiences and, even family experiences. But one of the things that I found a lot in this piece was kind of this emergence of the interest in rituals in the workplace. And so one of the people that I spoke with was this man called Kirsat Ozench. He owns Ritual Design Lab. He's one of the co-founders of Ritual Design Lab. And basically what it is, it's fascinating. He's based in the Bay Area, and he has worked with Stanford D School, Stanford's design school, to create twice yearly pop-ups. He calls them pop-ups, but they're workshops basically. And so he has Stanford students partner with different corporations and create rituals for their workplaces, kind of focused on the challenges that those workplaces are experiencing. So that just blew my mind, because I think that there are so many examples, as we say, of rituals in different contexts. But, I guess you could kind of talk about it in the workplace, but he's truly working at it in the workplace. SAP was one of the clients of Ritual Design Lab. And what they did was they explained the design section of SAP in particular. It's a small team. They were explaining how onboarding was kind of a challenge. So that's what they came to Ritual Design Lab with. And they said, how can you help us? And so these students, they put together a ritual where they instructed the SAP design team to, every single time someone starts at SAP in that team, they will have the rest of the team bring over a product or item from their desk and put it on the new person's desk before they get there. So it could have there could be pictures of babies, and there could be, statues of little elephants from trips, or there could be anything.
The snow globe.
Right, exactly, the snow globe, exactly. So then someone arrives at their first day at work, and they're like, okay, what is this? And so they explained, they said, okay, this is the whole idea here is for you to figure out which item belongs to which person, and then talk to that person about that. And so I was talking to Kirsat about that, and it was really interesting because I asked him, I said, well, what is kind of the ROI on that? Which is, there you go with instrumental thinking versus ritual thinking. But I was like, really, is this? And he was like, well, the efficacy of rituals is almost impossible to, prove in
Hence
a
the
scientific
rationality
format.
definition.
Exactly. And so he said, but the one thing he can point to is that now it's been 2 years since they instituted this ritual at SAP's design team, and it's still in process.
Well, and you can see how it would strengthen people's getting to know each other.
Exactly.
So clearly serving some purpose there.
Exactly.
When you went through all this stuff, to me, there's some aspects of work that you get into what I would think of as almost like negative rituals, like the dreaded weekly meeting. You do this thing over and over again. Are there negative rituals?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. I walked into this article and I said, all right, I'm going to ask every single person, so what's a good ritual and what's a bad ritual? That just seems like I want to know. Why wouldn't I want to know? And so I found that no one had an answer. And the reason for that was because it's a totally different definition of action. So a ritual isn't inherently negative. And if it is negative, if it basically isn't effective, I guess negative wouldn't be the term. So if it isn't effective, it just gets phased out. So for example, if a CEO or someone in the C-suite says, okay, everyone needs to do this ritual. We're going to have a status update meeting at 9:05 a.m. on every Monday, and you have to come with 5 things, and no one really shows up, and it's kind of just like this thing that kind of fades. You could call that a negative ritual, but really none of the scientists that I spoke with call anything negative. They basically just say that it's kind of a different way of thinking. They say that it's, a ritual that is powerful. In order for something to be a ritual, it needs to have so many things that are really positive, like buy-in and fun silliness, irrationality, and that kind of thing, that it's almost like the negative is taken out of it.
And the fact that in most cases it develops organically, things typically that are negative aren't growing organically. They're not fed. They're typically, weeded out.
Yes, I will say that, but some people did want to talk a lot about how the ritual of their boss emailing them on Sunday night at 4 a.m. is a horrible ritual. And I was like, yeah, I don't know if that's really a ritual.
Sounds like a bad habit.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, that's a really interesting segue, because there's a lot of confusion over what's a habit and what's a ritual. Because, and that's one thing that I spoke with a lot of people about. Dr. Christine Ligari, a psychology professor at the University of Texas at Austin, it was really interesting because she was talking about how, brushing your teeth, for example. Okay, so she asked me, she said, do you brush your teeth before you eat breakfast or after you eat breakfast? And I said, always after. And she's like, well, because like do you consider that a ritual? And I said, well, I guess like it is something I do every single day after I eat breakfast. And she said, no, it's not a ritual. And I was so confused. And she's like, well, do you do it at the exact same time? Are you wearing the same outfit? Do you make sure that do you follow?
Do you do a little dance?
Do you do a little dance before? Exactly. And so I said, well, I guess not really. And so that's not a ritual, but it's confusing because it's kind of, it's there. And it's also not a sacred thing. And one thing that's a differentiator with some rituals that some people said was that they're done in groups. So that was kind of one thing that was really an interesting concept to me. And I actually pushed back against that a little bit with some of my sources because I thought, well, what about prayer? Couldn't you say that's a ritual? And now getting into the religious aspect, and some of them said, yes, that is possible to say that's a ritual, but that is rooted in groups. And so
Exactly.
that is rooted in a group activity. And so even that is still, group. The group element is still there.
It's really starting to make sense how this could be valuable to business. Average companies not spending hundreds of thousands on consultants perhaps do themselves to create rituals.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I think that there are so many things that people can do, even like, startups with 3 people, I think they can do them. I think in terms of steps, I think that I would say the first step is identify a moment in a life cycle of your company that is really important. So for example, it's like you can design a ritual around the onboarding process of a new hire. You can design a ritual around, every time you have a team all hands meeting. You can design a ritual around something that's important. And so it's hard to design rituals around, 3 p.m. on a Wednesday if you're not actually doing anything. There needs to be an action. I think the second thing to really think about in terms of how to design a ritual is to somehow tie that ritual to the company value. So some sort of value that your company does have, it needs to be tied in. So if one of your values is cohesion, or one of your values is collaboration or transparency, or communication, try to figure out how to, kind of
reinforce
those things. Because it's really, one thing that Dr. Hobson said is it's a physical manifestation of your company value. That's the thing that's going to really stick. And so I think another thing, though, is to really to attach some serious meaning to it. Like it can't just be, rituals can absolutely be fun and they should be silly and irrational, all of that, but I think that having real meaning behind it makes sense. And so some of the things that we spoke about, kind of having your team decide what those rituals are. And so that can be really hard for a business owner because a business owner might think, well, wait, I just want everyone to be cohesive right now. Like, why aren't they? Like, I'll just design a ritual, in my free time and then come to work on Monday and say, this is what we're doing. That won't work. And so I think the thing that's really important is to, gather your team together and step back and watch how they accomplish a problem. So really, put them into a scenario where maybe it's not a life or death thing. It's not your biggest client or your major sales goal, but it's something that you can watch them and see how they interact with each other and really be the observer and then gain something from that and be able to take that and say like, hey guys, what do you think about this?
So let it be ground up.
Yes.
Be open to the serendipity of it.
Yes, exactly. Because if they don't come up with the idea, then it's not going to stick.
It's not as authentic to them.
No,
right?
It's not as authentic to them. It's like the Fast Food Friday idea. Like, right. I don't know if the CEO of Prolific Interactive would have wanted that. Like, who knows? I'm sure that person would probably be endorsing it, but it's not, you don't know it unless you're in the trenches. And so like what works for those people and that's why a lot of rituals that are really effective are very team specific.
Yeah, and I think the fun aspect shouldn't be underestimated.
Yeah,
there's just not enough of those moments in the day, right?
Exactly, and that's what brings you to work. That's what makes you want to go to work. I think, and going back to the conversation that we had previously about the unemployment rate and how people they have their pick of so many jobs right now. Really, it's all about company culture at this point, and I think a lot of people are talking about that. Especially for high performers, people who are pinged on LinkedIn on a daily, sometimes basis, they can just get their pick of any job they want. And so really all that matters are the people that you work with, the culture and the values that your company stands for. And so rituals, if you can make a physical manifestation of that value and that bonds your team, there's nothing more powerful than that.
So.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
I love it. I can't wait to go back and create some rituals at Beautiful. Katie,
That's
thank you
great.
so much
Thank
for
you,
joining
Lou.
us
It's
today.
really nice talking with you.
And I'd like to thank everybody for watching. We're going to be addressing topics like this throughout the series. We'd love to hear from you, what you'd like to understand, the topics that are interesting to you. So please comment, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.